OutKick Clay Travis joins us right now. Clay, Pat McAfee just went on his show, Pat McAfee Live, and called one of the top bosses at ESPN a rat. How about this?
It's a great entertainment. I would be not happy if I'm at ESPN and he put him in a really tough spot, right? I can't even think of a precedent like this where somebody goes on ESPN or any television network, right, and just calls their boss a rat and says somebody's trying to sabotage the show live on the show. So I think ESPN's in a really tough spot. They're going to have to do something. And right now, McAfee is scheduled to be on, I think, the part of the festivities surrounding the Washington and Michigan game on Monday. I don't know how that goes. But this is a tough spot for ESPN. And I think coming on the heels, look, first of all, the Aaron Rodgers thing, to me, nobody should be responsible for what a guest, no host should be responsible for what a guest says on his or her show, just like a guest shouldn't be responsible for what someone says on the host says, right?
Yes.
Everybody is responsible for their own comments. And so the idea that ESPN is apologizing for what a guest said on a show, I just don't think that I think that precedent is wrong. Like, Aaron Rodgers is responsible for everything he says. Pat McAfee isn't. ESPN isn't. I don't buy into the whole idea of, oh, you don't have the right to platform this person. Like, no, people should be able to say whatever they want. If you don't like what they say, you can react to it and disagree with it, or you can agree with it. And so I think that whole story is to a large extent of ESPN's own creation. And obviously, with Jimmy Kimmel being in-house, there's an element I get of allowing a guest to fire in-house. I can see why Jimmy Kimmel would not be happy with that. Like, I don't think back in the day, David Letterman would have been happy if somebody had taken a shot at him on the CBS, broadcast network when he was airing on there. But to me, this is a much bigger story. Like, Pat McAfee calling out by name one of his bosses and calling him a rat is, I think, really entertaining. Because I can only picture the ESPN PR team just running around while, like, the whole place is on fire right now. And they thought they had just put the fire out because they think they're so smart in PR. They put that statement out about Aaron Rodgers on Friday afternoon.
We've done it, guys. We've done it. Our work is done.
This puts it to bed. Let's pour ourselves a drink, kick our feet up.
Head to the playoff.
There's no PR fires here now. And then the McAfee thing is, like, to me, talking about his boss in-house on air, like 10 times the story, if not 100 times the story. Of the joke that Aaron Rodgers made.
Well, Clay, consider this, just thinking about this. So what Pat McAfee is claiming, I mean, think about what has gone on behind the scenes that only McAfee's had the balls to stand up and say the way he did today. I mean, that's the other thing. If they're going to sabotage McAfee, who they brought on for exactly this, and because of ratings, and they're going to do that behind the scenes to get him out. It reminds me a bit of Barstool, but it's way bigger than that for that one show or one day. But, I mean, McAfee's doing this, and he's calling their bluff. He's like, hey, you're going to take Rodgers off if you're going to remove me or you're going to sabotage me. I'll take the live stream back to YouTube where it streams live every day and screw you.
The interesting dynamic now is going to be how this plays out. Because to your point, ESPN could go to Pat McAfee and say, this guy can no longer be on your show. Meaning Aaron Rodgers. And if I'm Pat McAfee, I say no. I say you don't have the ability to dictate who I can have as a guest on my shows. And I would say that on my own shows, right? I've had lots of shows that say we can't put you on anymore, right? I have never in my life gone to a guest and said, oh, my bosses won't let me put you on as a guest anymore, so I'm going to have to stop allowing you to be a guest. I wouldn't do it. And I would imagine McAfee would say, hey, I control what goes on this show. You guys can't dictate to me who guests are. And I could see that blowing up in a big way. Remember, ESPN has invested a lot of money in him.
Yeah.
They believe that he is one of the future faces of the network, and they're paying him as such. And so this creates a huge mess for them in terms of how they handle it. Because it's, again, to my knowledge, without precedent. I can't remember in the world of sports or media, period. Can you guys remember? I mean, you can MSNBC, Fox News, CNN, CBS, NBC, ABC. I can't remember Fox, FS1, ESPN. I can't remember somebody going on air and by name calling one of their bosses a rat. Now, sometimes in radio, maybe Howard Stern did it back in the day. I'm not an expert on that.
Yeah, his boss, he called him.
Yeah, but sometimes there's almost a wink and a nod associated with that, where the people acknowledge that they're now part of the character. But in general, that is not well received. So I can only, I just, whenever stuff like this happens, I love thinking about what the reaction is behind the scenes, and just picturing everybody running down the hallways as soon as this started to go viral. And by the way, you can watch the clip. It's up at OutKick. I don't know if you guys have
played it. Yeah, we played it.
So you heard it on this show. It's up on OutKick. You can go read about it if you want to. And with the fact that the biggest show of the year for ESPN is Monday, literally the most watched broadcast they have every week is the national championship game on ESPN. I would imagine that there's a lot of panic given McAfee's association with that show. So, get your popcorn, as I said when I tweeted out the video clip. This is a big deal.
Clay, the story is so crazy that when we were discussing it, and I'm trying to process it, I even had to ask the question out loud, are we in the middle of a work? Given Pat McAfee's history with professional wrestling, are we all being played on this? Because it sounds like an Andy Kaufman bit that's taking place right now with him. I don't think we are. I think he's being honest, and I think Norby Williamson is probably really pissed right now about what is happening. Here's my question for you, Clay, because you're the perfect person to ask, because you lived in different lives as a media personality, as someone who's worked for big corporations, someone who sold their company to a big corporation, someone who independently made their own brand, also like a Pat McAfee. How is this viewed in the long run? We love this right now. I hear this, and I just applaud Pat McAfee. Think, man, the ball's on this guy. This is incredible. But 10 years from now, is Pat McAfee going to be remembered as brazen hero of the little guy? Or is Pat McAfee, even 3 to 5 years from now, going to be remembered as, oh, he's the guy who went on a network and publicly scorched and went after his own boss, and every big media company is not going to employ him now because he made that move? How is this viewed?
Well, so I would imagine there's a lot of apprehension in some big media companies. I mean, my thought is, like, he'd be great at OutKick, right? That's my reaction. Now OutKick is a part of Fox, so I don't make that call, right? Fox would look at it and they'd be like, okay, does this make sense? Does not make sense, like they do with all talent. And there's people out there who work in media that would say, oh, we can, get the best out of Pat McAfee without creating the worst. I don't think it's bad for him. So that's the big media perspective, right? Looking at it. And there are some executives that would say, oh my God, if he'd say that about Norby Williamson, what would he say about me? And there are people who would not want to take that risk. So I think it does take some brands off the table. But I also think from his perspective, it's probably good, right? Because brand is all that matters. And his brand is, I'm going to tell you exactly what I think. It's not dissimilar to what I would say my brand is. I'm going to tell you exactly what I think. And so in terms of monetization, I don't know that it hurts him, because we live in a new environment where, he can get distributed on YouTube, or he could get distributed on Rumble, or somebody at satellite radio could look at that and say, boy, we really need a younger voice on satellite radio. And there's another job for him. I think it's different now, given the variety of platforms, than it would have been 10 or 15 years ago, when, okay, if ESPN takes him off air, basically his career is over, right? And I think it goes to talent itself as well. A lot of people who are not on ESPN, they kind of vanish. And that's long been the idea. I don't think, because Pat McAfee wasn't created inside of ESPN, I don't think, when I started OutKick, for instance, people said, oh my God, why would you ever not be writing at CBS or not be writing at, Deadspin, who had created a platform and all those things. And I was like, I think my audience is going to follow me. They did. I tend to think audiences follow talent now more than they follow networks. So I think it's probably not a super negative to Pat McAfee. Now, will somebody else pay him $18 million? I don't know about that. I don't know what his contract says. If ESPN decided we're firing you for cause, you can't do what you did, I think that would turn into potentially a mess. So that's the big picture analysis. I think ultimately all that matters is the work. If you can consistently put out entertaining work and entertaining content as a media member, you'll always be employed. I think that's more true than ever given the variety of platforms. But I think certainly there are some brands that would say to Disney, hey, this is what did you expect to happen when you hired somebody like McAfee? Similar, Bill Simmons had a bad exit from ESPN when they had the one-day Barstool story. Yeah. I don't think I would fit at ESPN because I don't think I would be dictated to. But so I think he'll be okay. But I think this is probably a 5-alarm fire inside of ESPN right now.
Let me pick up there briefly, Clay. So we had AJ Perez on from Front Office Sports who said, hey, maybe they pull Aaron Rodgers from the show, or they'll go to alternative programming for that segment. And he was giving the theory yesterday that McAfee would just continue to air it live on YouTube. Also pair this, looking ahead, Stephen A. Smith wants to be the highest paid person at ESPN, right? You talked to him about this.
Yep. Yeah, he told me that.
Stephen A. Smith's also doing his show. He's got his podcast and his video platform that's separate. It's not like they're going to shut him up either. And if they try to, what's he going to do? He's not going to shut up. He's got ESPN by the balls, just like McAfee does.
Yeah, well, ESPN, Stephen A. Smith is probably the most integral talent to ESPN right now. Because I think if you take Stephen A. Smith off First Take, I think that show would fall apart very quickly without him as the head, right?
No doubt.
And so I think ESPN is going to have to pay him whatever he wants because I don't think it's easily replaceable. I mean, that's, to me, the wins over replacement can be applied to all talent in all fields, right? How many more cars does the best car salesman sell than the worst or the average? I think Stephen A. Smith produces way more eyeballs than anybody else who could replace him would in the short term for sure, maybe in the long term as well. And the big issue to me with McAfee that's interesting and hasn't been talked about a lot is it's a default acknowledgement that ESPN can't build its own stars anymore. McAfee did not become famous because of ESPN at all. ESPN went and got him from the digital universe where he had created his own star. It felt desperate to me to need to do that for ESPN in the first place because it said, hey, we don't have a lot of talent on our bench, and so we're going to have to go outside. And I think this is an indictment of ESPN that they had to do this in the first place. And I think it shows that McAfee is in a decent position where he'll walk if he needs to.
I can't wait to see how this all spins from here. And then just naming Norby Williamson, right, as part of this specifically.
By name. I mean, going after bosses in general would have been aggressive to call some of them rats, but to specifically name, I think he's the third highest ranked person in all of ESPN and say he's a rat trying to sabotage the show. I don't know how, how you come back from this.
Well, and I know. If it becomes
unless maybe he is a rat trying to sabotage the show. The ultimate power move would be if they fired him and kept Pat McAfee.
Yeah, because
that's what I was about to ask. Who's more important to ESPN, Pat McAfee or Norby Williamson? If the higher-ups at Disney have to make a decision.
You're asking a talent who's more important, talent or management? My answer is always going to be talent, right?
I agree with you.
And every member of management is going to come out and say, oh, we're more important, right? Everybody thinks that whatever their job is, like Bill Belichick thinks he's more important than Tom Brady. I don't think there's any doubt. And then I think Robert Kraft thinks he's the owner of the Patriots, thinks he's more important than Bill Belichick and Tom Brady because he's the owner, right? Whatever position you're in, you're going to think that you're more important. But if I had to choose, I would say McAfee. The problem is then you set the precedent of any talent that wants to go on air and attack a manager gets the manager fired, and you side with talent. Well, if I'm Stephen A. Smith and somebody starts to bow up to me, why don't I just go on First Take and say, this show's great, but it'd be way better if X got fired from ESPN. He's a rat, and I hate him. Heck, with the precedent set, you do it, then you do it.
I mean, Clay, what you know about Disney, not what you do, what you know about Disney, other than drafting or casting an Asian woman as Pat McAfee in the Disney movie about his life. What decision?
Really funny.
What decision do you think they'll make? Who will they side with? Norby Williamson, who everyone in the building has known for years and has some clout there, or this new renegade that just came on to ESPN that clearly has a name and some talent?
It's a good question. And also, it's not about what you do just in this scenario. It's that the precedent that you're setting going forward, which is why I said if you set the precedent of if you call somebody a rat in management, they get fired. I don't think you can set that precedent because this is not the way, even if Pat McAfee and Norby Williamson hate each other, you don't want this to be the way that this gets resolved, right? In a public, nasty dispute that forces the company's hand. I think this is going to get tied in with Aaron Rodgers because I think this is probably where this tension is really coming from to a certain extent. And so I would expect that there will be some sort of, I think they'll suspend Pat McAfee for like 2 weeks. I don't think they'll have him on Monday's show. I think they'll say what he said about management's unacceptable. It's not true. I think they'll suspend him for like 2 weeks. That takes Aaron Rodgers off the show for 2 weeks as well, right? Because Pat McAfee's not there. Nobody else is going to talk to him. But I think the lingering issue that's going to come forward is I think that management's going to probably try to take more control of McAfee's show. And to me, what McAfee did that overplayed his hand is they didn't try to take Aaron Rodgers off yet, at least not publicly. Because I think if they did, and McAfee went public on his show and said, hey, we got major issues. I'm going to be honest with you guys. They're telling me I can't have Aaron Rodgers on the show because of what he says on the show. I disagree with that. They told me they would never do this when I came. They need to cut me a check. I'm done here. If I can't do the show that I want to do, I'm going to leave. And that really puts ESPN in a tough spot because then they're directly infringing on his ability to do the show that he signed up to do, right? Aaron Rodgers guest on a show. ESPN knew what they were buying. But here, where you come out and do it this way, now I could see ESPN feeling like they have a way to get out of this deal because I'm sure it violates his contract, the morals clause in some way to go out and rip and say that his boss is a rat and by name.
Well, sabotage would also do that, though. If you sabotage
I think he'd rather be fired for cause than be told what to say on his show. I really do.
Oh, I think it comes back to it benefits him. And then, by the way, I don't even know if ESPN suspends him for 2 weeks. The real interesting question is why couldn't he do his show on YouTube?
Well, I'm reading through this.
His nose at
yeah, I mean he still has his show on YouTube.
He can still do the YouTube show.
The upfront when they announced that they had signed with ESPN.
That's the benefit of having the ability to do multiple shows, right? And that's why Stephen A. is building out his own studio at home, and that's why all these guys want to have. And I get it. I'm talent. I want to have the ability to flip a switch and be able to go live whenever I want. I've been doing it for a long time at OutKick. And the reason I founded OutKick was so nobody could ever tell me what I could or couldn't say. And so I think that is, I think that's got to be a big part of McAfee's thinking. But my question is just, you guys do live radio. Sometimes live radio is very thought out, and you're like, hey, next segment we're going to talk about this, and then stories happen and you change and you evolve, which is different than other mediums sometimes. My question is, was this a planned segment for McAfee? Did he know, hey, I'm going to call Norby Williamson a rat, or was just an off-the-cuff kind of rant that he got into that played out differently than he thought? In other words, how calculated was this choice by McAfee, and how much of it was live radio? I don't have a filter. I'm going to say exactly what I want to say. I've done live radio for 15 years now or whatever it is. Sometimes you're like, hey, I'm going to sit down here and talk about this segment, and then you go in different directions. I just wonder how calculated this was because it's so specific and so direct. it feels to me like it was planned more than it was just an off-the-cuff thing. Like the Aaron Rodgers joke about Jimmy Kimmel, I don't think Aaron Rodgers planned that. I just think he's kind of a witty guy, and he's good on radio in terms of being entertaining. And I think he just threw that out based on the direction that the conversation was going. Whereas this to me feels like much more of a planned element. And I don't know. I mean, I would think at some point Pat McAfee's going to have to say something on Twitter. And apologizing would be very anti-brand, because it does, like, when you call someone a rat to later come back and be like, hey, when I called him a rat, I actually meant that I really enjoy working with him and he's a fabulous guy. Like, that's a tough transition, right? Like, you can't claim that you misspoke when you call him a rat.
I think he's getting fired for cause before he apologizes. I really do. I don't think that's who he is. And he just got done the day before explaining the Aaron Rodgers deal as, we don't come in here with a rundown. We don't really have a plan of action. We're just dudes talking about sports, and we like to mix it up. And that's what Aaron Rodgers was doing. Yeah. So I think this just happened on the show, and he just said exactly what he felt. Crazy, crazy story, Clay. No doubt about it. By the way, Michael McCarthy reporting that ESPN, he reached out for comment, and ESPN got back and said they are not commenting at this moment. Going back to your point, Clay, about that PR team at ESPN really having their work cut out for them this afternoon.
No, it's 5-alarm fire. And honestly, this is something that I would expect would go all the way up to Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney. Like, that's why they're not commenting. I don't know where Bob Iger is. He may be on a vacation trip to Australia like I was, during the holidays for all we know. But I guarantee you that whatever choice they make on the McAfee thing will run through Jimmy Pitaro, who runs ESPN, all the way up to Bob Iger, who runs Disney. Like, I don't think this is going to be something that they don't weigh in on.
He's got Jimmy Pitaro and Jimmy Kimmel pissed off, calling him right now.
All the Jimmys. Jimmy Fallon is next.
What do we do?
Jimmy Fallon better look out.
Clay, it's great to have you back, man. Good to hear from you, and glad everything looked great in Australia. Can't wait to catch up on that.
Good to have you back in the States.
Yeah, for sure. You guys have fun with this story on a Friday. I'll talk to you.
Yeah, man. There's Clay Travis. The other thing, Chad, consider that if they have him or they ask him to apologize, right? They can't make it. He'll just double down the next day, just like he did.
He's probably going to say, well, prove to me where I'm wrong.
This does not
about
end.
This. He knows about being frozen out for 45 minutes in 2018. Yep. I'm sure he knows a lot of things that are going on. He knows what's happening, and he said it. He's not. The most shocking conclusion to this, to me, would be Pat McAfee returning to ESPN Monday, apologizing to Norby Williamson, and moving on and allowing ESPN to control his content in some way. He would just as likely go back to YouTube, do his own thing again, get sponsors, have all the street cred in the world that he would have at that point, and not mess with ESPN anymore. So I really think this is going to come down to a decision between Disney deciding if they want to continue with Pat McAfee as is, him doing his show, using his talent, or Norby Williamson being employed at ESPN. I think the line is drawn in the sand.
Is what was going on, and what is McAfee? What did he not say of how he has figured this out, right? I mean, he goes into detail, but first you got to figure out if the guy's right. Because Norby Williamson, he's third on the hierarchy? If you go through and read the quote from Jimmy Pitaro when they hired him, this is what Jimmy Pitaro said. Pat is a proven talent. He and his team have built the Pat McAfee Show into one of the most engaging programs in sports and all of media. This is from ESPN chairman Jimmy Pitaro. It is a destination for athlete interviews and breaking news, and the centerpiece of a growing community of sports fans. We're honored to bring Pat and the show to ESPN through a multifaceted, multi-platform approach. They brought him in to do the opposite of what they've been doing.
To be
so
Pat McAfee.
Why they're not cultivating their own talent, at least they acknowledged that and went and got Pat McAfee, because what they were doing was failing. And I don't know how you respond to this if you're ESPN without failing. You're either losing McAfee, which is something that you're doing an about-face with, to then back Norby Williamson, who allegedly is tanking the show that you brought in to turn things around for you. Or you keep him there and he's going to continue to do this and give it. Think about the stage it could give for others on the platform if McAfee's doing it. Stephen A. Smith certainly would. But it leads to something else where, you're going to keep McAfee on. Well, you're going to take Rodgers off, so you're going to go to something else for 15, 20 minutes and then come back to it, but he's live on YouTube. I mean, there's a reason why anytime we play a clip from Stephen A. Smith, it's from his YouTube show. It's not from First Take, because with his contract up, he's building his own platform there too. He's promoting that, which is brilliant. But everything you play is from his show on YouTube, his clips. It's not from First Take.
Not the ESPN part of it. Or Norby Williamson, by the way, nearly 4 decades at ESPN. I'm on his bio right now on the site. He is executive editor and head of event and studio production. Current role is executive editor and head of event. He oversees all of ESPN's football content, including NFL, college football, XFL, now UFL, and SEC Network. And he continues oversight of production of sports, including baseball, NHL, UFC, boxing, tennis, and golf. Sports Center he oversees. We'll get into this, Hutton, but what is Norby Williamson's problem with Pat McAfee other than he doesn't have control of Pat McAfee? That has to be it. That McAfee has his own production team that he brought over. He does his own thing out of his studio in Indianapolis. He does it all on his own. And does that just piss off Norby Williamson to the point that he wants to sabotage the guy and get him out? Which I don't understand any concept of self over brand or self over team. Because what's good for ESPN is Pat McAfee succeeding. Pat McAfee gives a company that was known for a lot of bad things for a while some street cred with a fresh-faced, fresh-brained, scorched earth type dude in there. It only helps ESPN if Pat McAfee succeeds. I don't get, it's just got to be, again, we don't know what he's done. We just know McAfee's allegation about him. But if he doesn't like McAfee and doesn't want him there, what other reason could that be other than he doesn't control McAfee and he hates that?
Again, it doesn't make sense. But after he does the apology, non-apology, whatever, but he says Rodgers is going to come on next week and say this. He's speaking for Aaron Rodgers without doing that. Rodgers will do it next week. McAfee's doing it now. Right after he does that, Chad, the New York Post article comes out where it says this. Since the inception of McAfee's show on ESPN in the fall, Stephen A. Smith and First Take are handing McAfee a 583,000 viewer lead-in. McAfee's maintaining just 302,000, which is a 48% drop. As compared to the same window last year, which featured SportsCenter, McAfee's down 12%. On FS1, Colin Cowherd's show has nearly beaten McAfee on some days and saw 19% growth from last year to average 156,000 viewers. Now ESPN counters these numbers by noting McAfee's direct-to-consumer and social following, but it's a point to be taken in our new media world. So this is what he's referencing, these numbers. More reaction to this. Streaming live, OutKick.com. Go to OutKick.com/watch. Bookmark that. We're live each day, reacting as news happens live, and hitting the top sports stories.
This is a great example of reacting to live news on this show today.
But also, Chad, this is a great example of just standing up for what you stand for.
Yeah. I don't hate it. I do not hate it from Pat McAfee, and all signs point to him maybe being right about Norby Williamson if, in fact, he's the one person with the info that continues to get leaked over and over again.
More coming on Hot Mic with Hutton Withrow.